you're about to start full-time traveling, this video is going to save you a lot of unnecessary stress. I've spent the last 6 months traveling across multiple countries and continents, and I've learned what really matters once you're living this lifestyle day after day. In this video, I'm sharing 21 tips that will help you make full-time travel easier, more manageable, and a lot less overwhelming. Let's get into it. Don't make big decisions on travel days. This is a lesson I learned the hard way. Travel days just mess with your perspective. I've had more than a few phone calls with my mom on travel days where I'm saying things like, I don't know if this place is right, or I'm not sure if I want to stay in this accommodation, or just generally questioning everything. And almost every single time, after a good night's sleep, I wake up the next day feeling completely different. What took me a while to understand is that travel days are already a lot. You're packing up your life, navigating transportation, dealing with logistics, arriving somewhere unfamiliar, and trying to orient yourself, all while you're probably underslept, underfed, and overstimulated. Even when everything goes smoothly, it's still draining. So now I don't make big decisions on travel days. I don't judge the place. I don't decide whether I should stay or leave. I don't evaluate my life choices. Instead, I ask a much simpler set of questions. Am I tired? Have I eaten? Have I had water? Do I just need a shower and a snack? Because most of the time, that's what's actually going on. My only goal now on a travel day is to get from point A to point B. Eat something simple, unpack just enough, and rest. And if I still feel unsure a few days later, then I pay attention. Travel days aren't the time to decide how you feel about a place. They're just part of the transition. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison shows up differently when you're traveling long term. Not only is there the comparison to friends or people back home who seem settled, productive, or moving forward in more traditional ways, but at the same time, there's comparison to other travelers, especially the short-term travelers who are trying to fit everything in. They're out moving fast, sightseeing all day, checking off landmarks, constantly doing something cool or exciting. Meanwhile, you might be taking a nap or working on your laptop or skipping something because you've already been on the road for weeks or months. It is really easy in those moments to think you're doing it wrong, that you're being lazy, that you're wasting the experience. And this is where the shoulds sneak in, that you should be doing more, seeing more, or maximizing more. In Guatemala, everyone I met was talking about Tikal. It was the thing to do. But when I actually looked into it, flights, accommodation, tour guides, it was going to be close to $1,000 for a long weekend. And honestly, it just didn't feel essential for me right then, especially traveling without an income. Old me would have gone anyway just to avoid feeling like I missed out. But this time I didn't, and I don't regret it. What helped me was realizing that I wasn't on the same timeline or even on the same trip as those travelers. Short-term travel and long-term travel are completely different experiences with completely different goals. Someone who's in place for 4 days should be packing it in. Someone who's living there for weeks or months needs sustainability. The same goes for comparing yourself to other full-time travelers. Everyone's version of this looks different. Different budgets, different energy levels, different priorities, different reasons for being on the road. If you don't let go of comparison, you'll end up planning your days around what looks impressive instead of what actually feels good. And that is a fast track to burnout. Now, when I catch myself asking, should I be doing more? I ask, would I still feel this way if I hadn't heard about anyone else's plans? And usually that answers it. Set up your connectivity before you land. The first few hours in a new country are usually the most disorienting, but being connected immediately changes that experience completely. I always set up an eSIM before I land now, and it's one of the simplest things that's made travel feel calmer. Companies like Airlo or Holofly have worked really well for me, and the difference is landing with maps, ride apps, and internet already working instead of standing in an airport trying to figure out Wi-Fi or where to buy a SIM. The other big piece people underestimate about connectivity is the internet inside their accommodation. I've stayed in places in India and Guatemala where there was technically Wi-Fi, just not in my room. That meant if I wanted to work or figure out logistics or even just scroll on my phone, I either had to sit in the common areas or burn through my data, and that adds up really quickly. Not just in money, but in frustration. So now I always check the reviews specifically for internet quality, not just on the property, but in my specific accommodation as well. When you're traveling long-term, connectivity isn't just a bonus, it's how you navigate, communicate, work, and decompress. Getting this right up front saves you a lot of unnecessary friction. Have more than one banking option. One thing I didn't fully appreciate before traveling long-term is how inconsistent banking can be once you're outside of your home country. Cards that usually work everywhere suddenly don't, ATMs accept some bank cards and not others, and there's rarely a clear explanation. That's why I always travel with at least 2 debit cards and 2 credit cards from different banks. Recently in Antigua, my Capital One debit card, which had always worked fine, wouldn't work at a single ATM I tried. I went to 5 different machines before giving up. The only reason it wasn't a problem was because I had a second debit card with me. For longer stays where I need larger amounts of cash, I've learned to plan beyond just ATM withdrawals. When I was in Guatemala for a couple months and needed to pay for school and accommodation in cash, Withdrawing small amounts repeatedly from ATMs meant paying a lot in fees. Using Western Union for a larger withdrawal ended up being simpler and cheaper. With travel, it's not just about how much money you have, but how easily you can access it. That's why you don't want to rely on only one method. When you have backups, a card failing is an inconvenience, not a crisis. Travel insurance is not optional. Travel insurance is one of those things that you don't think much about until you really need it. I haven't personally had to use mine yet, but seeing a friend deal with medical issues while traveling in India completely changed how I think about it. What could have been a terrifying situation was much more manageable because insurance was already in place. Having insurance doesn't mean you expect something bad to happen, it means you don't have to panic if it does. Be intentional about staying connected. When you travel long term, every relationship in your life becomes long distance. Friends, family, everyone. Now, this is something you technically know before you start traveling, but it feels very different once you're living it. There are no quick plans or spontaneous check-ins anymore. Every connection now takes intention. And what surprised me the most was the mental load of all of this. I didn't realize how much work staying connected becomes when everyone you care about lives somewhere else. Keeping up with messages, calls, and time differences across multiple people can start to feel very overwhelming if you expect yourself to show up in the same way that you did at home. I remember feeling constantly behind, like I was failing at being a good friend because I couldn't keep up with everyone. What actually helped was resetting expectations, both other people's and mine. I started telling people up front that I might be slow to respond. I stopped assuming calls would magically happen and started scheduling them instead. And I let go of the guilt when I couldn't show up the way I used to. I also got more intentional about when I responded. For me, Sundays became my main connection day. I'll sit in a cafe when I'm relaxed and not rushing anywhere, and that's when I catch up on my texts and voice notes and messages I've been meaning to reply to. Having a dedicated time for that stopped connection from feeling like something I was constantly failing at during the week. Once you stop trying to keep every relationship running at full speed all the time, staying connected becomes a lot more manageable. Time zones matter more than distance. One thing I wish I'd thought about earlier is how much time zones shape your experience of long-term travel. Distance is obvious. Time zones are easier to overlook until you're living in them. I noticed a big difference depending on where I was. Guatemala is still far from friends and family, but because it's in central time zone, our days overlap. It's easier to exchange messages during normal hours and stay loosely connected without needing as much coordination. India was much harder. By the time my day was winding down, my mom's day was just starting, and our windows to connect were small and easy to miss. What I've learned is that time zones quietly add another layer of effort to staying connected. When there's little overlap, connection takes even more energy than it already does, and it's easier to feel disconnected even when you're trying. So now I think about time zones during the planning stage. If I know I'll be traveling for a long stretch, I try to build in periods where I'm closer to the people I want to stay connected to, even if it's just for a month or two. If you're feeling more disconnected than you expected while traveling, it's not always about effort or distance. Sometimes it's just the clock. Pace your travel. When you first start traveling long term, it is tempting to move quickly. New country, new city, new place. There's this energy of, I'm here, I should see it all. And that works for a week or two, but it doesn't work for months at a time. What I didn't realize at first is that every move resets your life. New grocery store, new transport system, new cultural differences, new people. Even simple tasks take more brain power. If you move too often, you're constantly starting over, and that gets exhausting over time. But pace isn't just about how often you change cities. Even if you stay put, you can still overload yourself by packing every day with big plans. Nonstop sightseeing looks fun on Instagram, but it can be a lot. You're navigating, planning, walking around more than usual, often in heat, often around crowds. You stack 5 days of that back to back, you will feel it. When I first started traveling long term, I did both. I moved quickly and I stacked big days. Tour one day, hike the next, city center the next. I told myself I'd rest later, but later never really came. But what changed everything was pacing on both levels. Staying longer, letting myself have more normal days, alternating higher effort days with lower effort ones. A sightseeing day followed by a gym day. That shift alone made long-term travel feel more sustainable. If you want this lifestyle to last, pace it. The goal isn't to maximize the experience, it's to build a life inside of it. Build flexibility into your plans. One mistake people make on either end is booking everything too far in advance or booking almost nothing at all. If you overplan, you lock yourself into decisions before you have real context. You commit to places or dates or programs based on what you think they'll be like. And sometimes that works, but sometimes you arrive and realize it doesn't fit the way you expected. When that happens, you're either losing money or forcing yourself to stay in something that already feels off. I learned this the hard way when I signed up for a month-long meditation course that I didn't end up resonating with. Getting out of it meant losing money, and it taught me early that flexibility would have saved both stress and cash. But underplanning isn't better. Showing up somewhere with no idea where you're staying next or how you're getting there sounds adventurous, but over time it creates background stress. You're constantly researching or scrambling or making decisions in real time. The sweet spot for me has been this. I book my arrival and first stretch, enough to feel grounded, and then I leave space. When I first came to Guatemala, I didn't book my entire route through the country, and because of that, I extended my time in Antigua and added a full month in Lake Atitlan. None of that would have happened if I had locked everything in months earlier. And sometimes when I'm unsure, I use refundable options early on. For example, I've booked refundable flights and accommodation while I'm still feeling out a destination. Then I set price alerts and give myself time to sit with the decision. Once I'm confident, if there's still time, I rebook non-refundable or cheaper options. It costs a little more upfront sometimes, but it buys clarity. Flexibility isn't always realistic long term, but it's about knowing when flexibility is worth paying for. Book enough to feel secure and leave enough open to adjust once you have real experience. Cheap travel isn't always the cheapest option. When you're traveling long term, it's easy to default to the cheapest option. You're thinking sustainability, you're thinking budgets. Trust me, I get it. But I learned the hard way that the cheapest option can cost you in other ways. I stayed in an ashram in India that was freezing at night and full of bugs and just generally uncomfortable. I wasn't sleeping well, I was cold, I was constantly on edge. And that started to affect everything: my mood, my patience, my resilience, even how I felt about being in India. When your sleep is off, everything feels heavier. Small inconveniences feel bigger, social interactions feel harder, decision making feels more draining. Now, I still travel consciously with money, but I ask a different question. Is this saving money or is it borrowing against my well-being? Sometimes paying a little more for heating or quiet or cleanliness or location protects your sleep and mental stability, and those things compound. If you're staying somewhere for weeks or months, that daily comfort matters more than a short-term savings number. Now, this doesn't always mean choose the expensive option. It means be strategic. Save on flights, save on tourist traps, but protect your sleep and your baseline comfort. Because when you're living this lifestyle long term, your nervous system is already doing a lot. Don't make it work overtime just to shave off a few dollars. Research seasons, weather, and cost realities. Before I left Guatemala, I was loosely planning to head straight to South America. It felt like the next natural step. And I looked closer and realized it was winter there. I had packed almost entirely for warm weather: light layers, sandals, nothing close to real cold gear. That moment forced me to realize something simple. When you're traveling long term, seasons matter more than vibes. And it's not just about temperature, it's about rainy season versus dry season, peak pricing versus shoulder season, tourist crowds versus empty towns, if you'll need heat or air conditioning, and whether it's actually available, even how many hours of daylight you'll have. All of that affects your daily life and your budget. Now, before I commit to a region, I check 3 things. What season is it? What does that season actually feel like day to day? How does pricing shift during that season? Long-term travel works best when your packing, budget, and location are all aligned. A little research upfront saves you from making expensive adjustments later. Build anchors into your week. One thing I noticed about long-term travel is that there are fewer default settings. At home, parts of your week just happen. You have a gym, a grocery store, a rhythm. Certain days tend to look similar. On the road, everything is negotiable, and while that can be extremely freeing, it also means your brain is constantly deciding how to shape the week. And over time, that mental load adds up. What helped me wasn't creating a strict schedule, but choosing a few anchors that don't change. If I'm staying somewhere longer than a couple weeks, I join a gym and I make an effort to go consistently. It just becomes part of my routine. I also block 1 day a week for life admin. That's when I book accommodations, check routes, respond to longer messages, look at budgets, and make decisions. The rest of the week, I don't constantly toggle between living and planning. You still get the freedom, you just don't have to rebuild your life every single Monday. Don't pack your entire life. Start small and upgrade. Before I left, I felt this pressure to pack for every possible scenario, every weather shift, every just in case. But long-term travel works better when you start lighter than you think you need to. We seem to forget, but there are stores everywhere. Now I pack for my first stop, not my entire year. I bring travel size essentials and the basics I know I'll use right away. And once I'm somewhere longer and understand the climate and what my daily life actually looks like, that's when I upgrade. Starting small saves space, baggage fees, and mental clutter. And those smaller travel-sized items end up being useful long-term. They're perfect for gym showers or overnight trips or short transitions between cities. You don't need to anticipate every version of yourself before you leave. Pack for the first chapter and let the rest unfold as you go. Don't quit on a bad week. Long-term travel, unfortunately, doesn't exempt you from life. You will still have stress, you will still feel lonely sometimes, and you'll still wake up in a bad mood for no clear reason. The difference is that when you're at home, a rough week just feels like life. But when you're traveling, it's easy to interpret it as a sign. Maybe this place is wrong. Maybe this lifestyle isn't for me. Maybe I made a mistake. I've had days where I have questioned everything, and then the next week it felt completely different. What helps is zooming out. Don't make any big decisions in the middle of a low moment. Don't book a flight out just because you're tired, and don't rewrite the entire plan because you had 3 days off in a row. Instead, try to tighten your world for a few days. Go to the gym, eat something familiar, catch up on sleep. Let your nervous system settle before you evaluate the big picture. Hard days aren't proof that you chose wrong. They're proof that you're still human. If you expect they'll happen and plan for them, they lose their power to derail you. You don't have to love every place. One thing no one really says out loud is that some places just won't click for you. And when you're full-time traveling, that can feel uncomfortable. It's easy to start wondering, did I choose wrong? Am I missing something? Why does everyone else seem obsessed with this place? I've had destinations that were perfectly good on paper, beautiful, popular, highly recommended, and I just didn't feel it. The mistake is trying to force it, trying harder to explore, booking more tours, telling yourself that you should be grateful or blown away. What's actually more helpful is to treat your reaction as data. Instead of forcing excitement, ask, is this a pace issue or a neighborhood issue? Or just not my kind of place. Then adjust accordingly. Maybe you move to a different part of the city, and maybe you slow down and stop trying to unlock it. Maybe you leave earlier than planned. You are not obligated to fall in love with every destination just because you traveled far to get there. Long-term travel works best when you respond honestly to your experience instead of performing enthusiasm for it. Sometimes the win isn't loving the place, it's learning what kind of places actually suit you.
Find your community.
Traveling alone doesn't automatically make you lonely, but if you're not intentional about building connection, it's easy to drift into isolation without even realizing it. One thing that's helped me is choosing my accommodation with connection in mind. I like staying in places that make casual connection more likely, somewhere with shared spaces or a built-in social vibe, so I'm not totally on my own by default. And that doesn't mean I'm sleeping in a shared dorm. I'm almost 40. The bunk bed era is definitely not for me, but I do like the community side of certain hostels, so a private room in a social hostel can be a really good middle ground. Lately, I've also been really into co-living spaces. They feel more like apartment-style living designed for remote workers or a slightly older crowd. You have your own room and privacy, but you're still around other people who are working, traveling, or staying for a while. There's usually a shared kitchen, common areas, maybe a co-working space, and sometimes even built-in events if you feel like joining. That same idea applies to homestays, retreats, or language schools. You're not forcing socializing, you're just choosing a setup where connection can happen without it being a whole project. If you only book private, fully self-contained apartments over and over, you're designing a very independent experience, which is completely fine. Just know that connection will require more effort. So when you're choosing accommodation, don't just filter by price and location. Ask yourself, does this setup make connection easier or harder? You don't need constant socializing, but you do need access to people. And designing for that upfront makes solo travel feel a lot more balanced. Short-term connections still count. One mistake long-term travelers make is dismissing connections because they're temporary. When you're traveling, you meet people knowing you might only have a few days together, and it's easy to think, what's the point? But some of the most meaningful connections I've made happened in very short windows. One of my closest friendships came from spending 6 days together at a retreat. 6 days, that's it. And we still talk, we still visit each other, we plan future trips. Temporary doesn't mean insignificant. In fact, when you meet people on the road, there's often a level of openness that's hard to find at home. You're both out of your normal context. You talk about real things faster and skip the small talk. The actionable shift here is don't hold back because the timeline is short. Have the deeper conversation. Go to the group dinner. Share your real thoughts. Exchange numbers even if you're not sure you'll use them. Some connections will fade and that's totally normal, but some will surprise you. Long-term travel becomes a lot richer when you stop measuring relationships by duration and start measuring them by depth. Familiarity is not a weakness. When you travel long-term, there's this quiet pressure to fully immerse all the time. Eat only local food, say yes to every new experience, constant novelty. But familiarity is not a failure of immersion. It's fuel. Thai food in Guatemala, pizza in India, a coffee shop that reminds you of your favorite one back home, a grocery store instead of the local market. Those small familiar anchors calm your nervous system in ways you don't always realize. When everything else is new, your brain is already working overtime. Giving yourself something known makes the rest of it easier. I used to feel like ordering something familiar like Domino's meant I wasn't doing it right. Now I see it as maintenance. The actionable shift here is simple. Build in familiarity on purpose. Find one meal you know you like and rotate it in. Revisit the same cafe instead of hunting for the best one every day. You don't get extra points for constant novelty. And long-term travel becomes a lot more sustainable when you stop trying to make every single moment new. Carry cat and dog treats. When you're traveling long-term, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of stray animals. And for me, carrying a small bag of cat or dog treats has become one of my favorite little travel habits. It takes up almost no space and you can buy a small pack locally, and it turns random moments into connection. There have been so many days where I've been walking around somewhere feeling tired or overwhelmed, and then I see a stray dog or cat. I sit sit and give them a little food and some attention, and it genuinely changes my mood. It's a small way to give something back to the place you're in, especially if you're an animal person. The only practical note here is to be thoughtful. Don't feed animals anything harmful, and be mindful of your safety. But if you love animals, this is such an easy way to build little moments of joy into your days. Long-term travel isn't just about landmarks and logistics. It's also about the small human or animal moments that stay with you. Travel with a purpose. For me, I'm not employed while I'm traveling, so I don't have a remote job structuring my days. So if I'm not intentional, it is very easy for time to blur. What's helped me most, though, is giving each season of travel a focus. In Guatemala, that's been Spanish school. In other places, it's been meditation or Reiki training, focusing on creative projects, or just accomplishing something specific like walking the Camino. It doesn't have to be intense though, it just has to matter to you. Having something you're building or learning changes how your weeks feel. Your days stop feeling random, you wake up with somewhere to be, you meet people through that activity, you improve at something over time. And if you are working remotely, this still applies, but in a different way. Maybe it's choosing a side project or training for something physical or committing to a creative goal alongside work. The actionable part here is simple. Before you land somewhere long-term, decide what is this chapter about? Language, fitness, certification, content creation, volunteering. Long-term travel feels a lot more meaningful when you're not just moving through places, you're also growing through them. Not everyone will understand your life. When you're traveling long-term, you'll notice that people start projecting onto your life. You become so lucky or brave or crazy. And sometimes it's subtle. Someone will ask who's planning everything for you or how you're pulling it off. Like it couldn't just possibly be you making the decision. The mistake is thinking you need to constantly explain yourself. I used to feel like I had to justify everything, why I left, how I afford it, what the long-term plan is, whether I'm worried about retirement, whether I'm ever planning to settle down. But you don't owe anyone a detailed defense of your life. The practical shift here is deciding ahead of time how much you want to share. Have a short answer ready, something simple like, it's something I wanted to try, or I saved for it, or I'm figuring it out as I go. Not everyone needs the full blueprint. Long-term travel gets a lot lighter when you stop trying to make it make sense to people who aren't meant to live it. Long-term travel isn't about escape, it's about alignment. This is one of the most important tips. When people hear long-term travel, they often assume it's about running away or escaping responsibility and avoiding real life. But the longer I've done this, the clearer something has become. You don't escape yourself by changing countries. If anything, travel makes you more aware of who you are. You learn what drains you, what excites you, which environments feel good, what rhythms work for you. For me, this hasn't been about avoiding life. It's been about testing what kind of life actually fits. Do I prefer fast-moving cities or slower towns? Do I feel better when I'm in community or more independent? Do I want constant novelty or do I want routine in new places? What kind of work feels meaningful? What kind of days feel sustainable? Travel is like a laboratory for alignment. Pay attention to how you feel in different cities. Notice what you repeat and what you avoid, and adjust based on that data. Because in the end, the goal isn't to collect countries. It's to build a life that actually fits you, whether that ends up being on the road or back in one place. That's what makes it worth it. So if you're thinking about long-term travel, I hope this gives you a clearer picture of what actually matters once you're living it. You don't have to learn all of this the hard way. If you found this helpful, make sure you're subscribed. I post new videos every week about long-term travel and building a life that actually fits. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next one.